everybody. Welcome to this video about Mercury, Neptune, and Saturn retrograde in June of 2022. We are the astrologers of Pandora Astrology. I'm Jamie Kale Miller. I'm in Berkeley, California.
I'm Julia Mijas in Pioneer, California.
This month, Mercury, Saturn, and Neptune are changing directions. Mercury begins the month in retrograde and then turns direct during the month, while Saturn begins direct but pivots retrograde, and Neptune does the same. It's going to create a particular feel this month, and we're going to tell you about important dates relative to these events coming this month and how you should handle these events coming this month. So let's look at the chart. What I have here is an animatable wheel set for June 1st. And we see that here at the beginning of the month, Mercury is retrograde, and you know this because of the little red RX symbol right here. Neptune is direct, it's traveling along through Pisces. Saturn is direct, it's traveling along through Aquarius. And over the course of the month, Mercury is going to go direct, and you see it does that pretty quickly early in the month. And then later in the month, there's Saturn, it goes retrograde, and later in the month still, Neptune goes retrograde. And we're going to talk about each of these and how they feel individually, dates when these changes happen, and then how the month feels as a whole. So let's start with Mercury. Going back to June 1st. And here's Mercury in retrograde. Mercury starts the month retrograde in Taurus right here. And then on June 3rd, Mercury is going direct right there. So it starts out direct in Taurus, and then it's going to move into Gemini. And so this is the completion of the Mercury retrograde period that began last month. And at the beginning of the month, we're probably all going to feel pretty tangled up relative to the usual Mercury things, right? Like logistics and communication. And so things should untangle as the month goes on. Julia, what are your thoughts about how we're going to experience this Mercury pivot?
Wow. Well, whenever you have a retrograding planet, and retrograde season is totally in full effect right now, it's a time of kind of review and redoing all of the significations of what that planet represents. So with Mercury, that's communication. It represents learning, writing. Also, it has a lot to do with technology. It's the old ruler of technology, where Uranus is the more modern one. So it can also affect, computers, phones, everything that we do to kind of link and network with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So any of those things can go wrong. You can find that you send messages, whether on the internet or, notes in the mail. These things can get lost, and your communications can get misconstrued. During Mercury retrograde is a really good time to just speak as clearly as possible and have a lot of patience, because even if your logistics are going okay, your internet service provider may be down or having trouble, or, your marketing professional that you work with, may be all tangled up. Some of your employees may be having trouble. And so when Mercury goes direct, things start to get better. And Julia, what about that shadow period that we like to talk about so much?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point to bring up. So when Mercury goes retrograde, it's not just like an on and off switch. Everything in astrology really depends on degrees. It's a matter of degree. So as Mercury is approaching its station, which means that it's fixed in the sky for a few days in the same spot, it really starts to slow down quite a bit. So the slowdown period, which precedes when it actually twists and goes direct, reverses its course, that's known as the shadow period. And so there'll be one before the actual Mercury retrograde bookends, when it's actually going reverse or forward. And then there's going to be also another one afterwards. So it's a little period of time where things, it's kind of like the Mercury retrograde begins kind of creeping up on you a little bit. So it's good to also have those dates in mind as well.
So, and I want to illustrate this because we see here's June 3rd, Mercury has gone direct. It's in 26 degrees Taurus. I think that's 5 minutes. And the very next day, it's still in 26 degrees. And the day after that, it's still in 26 degrees. And so it's moving slower than a degree a day. And it's a while before it starts to really speed up. And it's like another week and a half or so after Mercury pivots. It's really not until that extra week and a half or so passes that we start to feel like, phew, that Mercury retrograde is over and now things can get back to normal. And that really occupies pretty much the first half of the month. Now, the next piece that I want to talk about, and let's go back to the beginning of the month for this, is what Saturn is up to. Saturn begins the month direct, and here it is at 25 degrees of Aquarius, but very quickly, early into the month, right about here, between the 4th and 5th, it turns retrograde. So Saturn every year will go retrograde and then be retrograde for several months. And this is, Saturn appears like it's moving backwards, and this is a visual illusion, but it's a visual illusion that astrologers know about. It's not that we don't know that it's a visual illusion. And it's measurable. And this is really what's key. Astrology works with measurable data. When you have measurable data for a phenomenon, even if it is an illusion, it means that phenomena can be tracked and we can understand how it correlates to life here on Earth. And astrologers have been making those correlations for 5,000 years in the Western world, 10,000 years in the Eastern world. Astrology is really the oldest body of wisdom that we have on Earth. So my point is, Saturn goes retrograde, and when it does, we have a tendency to feel it. And especially if you're having a Saturn transit this year, if Saturn is transiting something in your own chart this year, you would absolutely feel this pivot because it signals the beginning of a deepening of Saturn's process. Now, what is Saturn's process? How does Saturn feel when it transits? Julia, what are your thoughts?
Ooh, well, when Saturn goes retrograde, Saturn is a planet. It represents the brick wall of reality. It can represent structure, security. But when Saturn goes retrograde, it definitely is a time when people can start feeling a little bit stuck. Saturn is
Blocked.
blocked is also a very good word for it. You can start feeling a little bit blocked, like the challenges start coming up a little bit, and you're kind of facing them sort of head on for the first time before you start working through it. And Saturn's cycle, you begin to ebb and flow a bit more with Saturn's cycle, but it's generally a period where things can feel a bit more difficult. There can be more testing, and we can feel a bit more blocked and stuck.
Yeah, it's like when Saturn turns retrograde, you've got to really face your limitations in what feels like a harder way. There isn't any escape from it. And if you get on board with that process and you say, yes, okay, Saturn, I'm going to look at my limitations. I'm going to create some structures that will get me out of this mess. I'm going to get more organized around it. I'm going to set some goals around it. I'm going to bootstrap myself and respond with vigor. That's what Saturn wants to hear. And when you respond that way, it can give you relief right away, even though Saturn will go on being retrograde for several more months. Now let's take a look at Neptune. So Neptune here, even on the 5th of June, is still direct. You don't see the little red RX next to it, but we'll see that appearing later in the month. And when we get to the 28th, there you see it. Neptune is now retrograde. So Neptune's process is very different from Saturn's in its tone and feel. Neptune introduces confusion and mystery. Julia, what are your thoughts about how Neptune transits feel, especially when retrograde?
Ooh, yeah. When Neptune starts going retrograde, that's when all the more challenging Neptune stuff can come out. It can be a time of being sort of a bit more deluded about things. It can also be a time where we might just kind of wake up to some disappointment where we're like, whoa, this isn't what I thought it was. Because Neptune's challenges are sometimes feeling disappointment, feelings of delusion, because it is the planet that does represent illusions.
Yes, absolutely. Neptune is the dreamer and visionary and loves to paint pretty pictures of how things could be, but Neptune doesn't deliver on those
Mm.
pictures. It's really
Gotcha.
just about, what can you dream up? What can you visualize? What can you imagine? And so when you get attached to one of Neptune's pretty pictures, that's when you're prone to delusion and disillusionment. And disillusionment can definitely happen more easily while Neptune is retrograde. It's again like, when a planet turns retrograde, you really have to face what you've not been doing right in that planet's department.
That's a
And
good way of
so
seeing it. Yeah.
if Neptune is going retrograde, then probably you're being faced with some pretty pictures that just have no viability in actual reality. And so you may find yourself wandering through a fog, a mystery of confusion, and feeling even like you're in a sort of a holding pattern, like a state of waiting. You might not even know what you're waiting for, but you're probably waiting to get clarity on that vision, and maybe you're even waiting to accept the ways that that vision isn't going to work out and might need some revision. So it's like a revisioning time, if you will, which is different from revising, I suppose. So, and it's interesting when Saturn and Neptune go retrograde, close to each other like this in a similar time period, because Saturn faces you with the hard realities and Neptune faces you with the disappointment about dreams.
Yeah.
And those two planets actually have the capacity to work together really powerfully. If you're willing to accept the Neptune dreams that Saturn says can be made into reality, then you've got yourself an engine right there. You've got yourself a castle in the clouds that can actually be built. And that's pretty magnificent.
Yeah, absolutely. These two guys, they offset each other in a lot of ways too. Like Neptune can help with some of if you have a very, very strong Saturn being very grounded, being very realistic, Neptune can kind of offset that by adding a little bit of idealism, compassion, vision, the softer, more subtler side of life, which is just as important. And a strong Saturn can offset some of Neptune's issues too. Neptune sometimes having its head in the clouds, Saturn can bring it down to earth. So yeah.
Yep. And so if I were to look at the flow of this whole month, considering that the month begins with Mercury retrograde and Saturn quickly going retrograde, and then followed by a shadow period for Mercury of a couple of weeks, and then finishing with Mercury direct and speeding up. So our minds all becoming clearer, and then finishing with Neptune going retrograde. I'd say it's almost like there's a plot structure to this month, beginning with a lot of mess and confusion and attempts to sort out logistics, and facing a hard wall of reality about that just in the first week or two of the month. And then beginning to get all of that sorted and untangled in the middle 2 weeks of the month. And then at the end of the month, coming to the realization that I've actually been deluded about some things. Some things that I've been dreaming of, that I've been imagining, are not actually going to be possible. And those need re-examining too.
Very cool.
Do you have any other thoughts to throw in there, Julia?
I think that's a good way of seeing it. In a lot of ways, yeah, Mercury and Saturn. Mercury is very rational. Saturn is very grounded in reality. And then Neptune just is another order of reality or non-reality altogether. So yeah, both of those, I think, in that idea of a cosmic plot structure for the month, really, that's very cool.
It takes us into both the physical and the metaphysical and sort of forces them to align with each other, actually. Yep. All right. Well, thank you for watching this video about Mercury, Neptune, and Saturn pivoting this month, June of 2022. You can find us at pandorastrology.com, and on the monthly forecast page, you will find more news that's current about the month. If you want a reading, you can find the readings tab. And if you want to check out your horoscope, we refresh those every month too on the horoscopes tab. And until next time, we'll see you around the cosmos. Bye-bye.
Bye.